So we're just going to go straight into this. My name is David, and tonight's No I'm Alcoholic. We're just going, if you'd like to unmute yourself, we go straight into the set-aside prayer, and we get into the spirit of things. So using God as you understand it, God, please help me set aside everything I think about now. With an open mind, a new understanding. Amen. Of course, we're just having a few moments of silence to gather our thoughts, reflect on Him. And the thing of the alcoholics who get to find the solution. And also the family members. So thank you, everyone. Here we go. We're getting ready. We've got John B. with us, historian out of New Jersey. And John will do an introduction to this presentation shortly. It's titled The Spirituality of Carl Gustav Jung. And just a quick heads up, John is back with us next week as well. And he's going to be doing a presentation for us. Thank you, John, on William D. Silkworth, the little doctor who loved drunks. But John B., it's over to you in New Jersey.
Hi, everyone. My name is John, and I am alcoholic. A privilege and a pleasure to be here. David, thank you for inviting me, and thank you to the group. It's always great to be able to share with a group of like-minded folks. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll get right in, and I'll click from the beginning. And David, give me a thumbs up if you're seeing and everything looks good. Okay. So a couple of months ago, I guess it was back in November, I had the privilege of joining all of you and doing the Gist of James. And if you enjoyed that presentation, you'll find this is in a similar vein, because actually the Gist of James was part one of a much larger presentation that I've kind of titled The Men Who Came to Believe. The Golden Road of Devotion, that is how I describe the path that we are all on. This goes back to some writing I had done back in 2009, and who knows, one day you may get to see a little more of it. But certainly, everything that I'm going to do tonight comes from that writing back then. And, the idea of the men who came to believe is really, really important. So I'm just going to go right into this. It's going to start off just like the Gist of James did, so sit back, relax. Keep an open mind, because you're going to hear some things again that, may not, ring with what you always hear. But this is good stuff, and that's why we're all here, I think.
So to you, to Dr. Shoemaker of the Oxford Groups, to William James, and to my own physician, Dr. Silkworth, we of AA owe this tremendous benefaction. As you will now clearly see, this astonishing chain of events was directly founded upon your own humility and deep perception.
So this comes from a letter that Bill wrote to Carl Jung back in 1961, and we'll dive into that a little later on in the presentation. But, as I look back at the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, it never fails to amaze and humble me to see how the actors were arranged in the drama that was going to unfold into AA. And there are no coincidences. Certain key players at the right moment and place and time had to come to believe in the power greater than human power, and then publicly lay the groundwork so that others might capture this belief and power. It is because of the humility and deep perception of these men that we have our program of recovery. Although working individual decades apart, their efforts came together under the hand of Providence to provide a solution to the age-old problem of alcoholism. Without their formulas for recovery, as expressed in their faith and their works, this simple pathway to a cure this golden road of devotion might have remained hidden to the alcoholics. So, we had taken our first steps on the pathway with the gist of James and a dive into the book, The Varieties of Religious Experience. And James said in the book, we and God have business together. Well, today, we and God have business together again. And Varieties, or VRE, is the edited transcript of the Gifford Lectures on Natural Religion James gave in Edinburgh, Scotland in 1901-1902 to many of the world's finest academics. And it was in these lectures that James suggested to his learned colleagues a radically different way of looking at and relating to the power of religion and religious experience, especially its ability to completely transform human lives. His observations and conclusions have helped provide the foundation upon which today many an alcoholic has built a new spiritual structure. So our path had continued with James's pronouncement that the only radical remedy I know for dipsomania is religiomania. And let me just touch on this word dipsomania, because this was the commonly used term to describe the malady before the popularizing of the designation alcoholism. And by the way, that was first introduced by a Swiss physician in 1849. But the term alcoholism and alcoholic really didn't take root until our big book was published. In fact, Alcoholics Anonymous was the main driver of those words coming into favor and frequent use. Prior to that, we were inebriates and dipsomaniacs. And if you will look up the word dipsomaniac in the American Heritage Dictionary, it is a person with an irresistible craving for alcoholic drink. Someone who would drink until they passed out, their thirst for spirits being insatiable, right? And in VRE, James well noted the spiritual nature of alcohol's power over mankind. James had an enlightened view, contrary to the popular opinion of then and now, sometimes now, that alcohol's attraction is pathological. Instead, James knew it kind of appealed to this mystical consciousness. About the time James was giving his groundbreaking lectures, our next benefactor, who we'd come to believe was only 27 years old and a recent graduate of the University of Basel in Switzerland. In 1900, he began his career at what would become his lifelong passion, the quest for insight into psychology, dreams, religious phenomenon, and the soul of the modern man. So Carl Gustav Jung was the founder of analytical psychology and is often considered to be the first modern psychologist to believe that the human psyche is by very nature religious. So, and by the way, when you hear that word, don't get upset. You got to keep an open mind, because these folks defined religion and religiousness differently than we do today. So Carl Jung would have a direct impact on the founding of Alcoholics Anonymous through his dealings with a New England industrialist named Roland Hazard. The legendary, and I have legendary in quotes here, story of this American businessman is found in the second chapter of the book Alcoholics Anonymous. So the account that's going to follow will may help to illustrate Jung's direct and immediate influence upon others who would come to believe. So our focus for the moment is on Jung and his philosophy regarding religion, religious experience, and those ideas which would become the foundation and cornerstones of our recovery program. We'll touch a little more on Roland as we go.
Few people know that the first taproot of AA hit pay dirt some 30 years ago in a physician's office. Dr. Carl Jung, that great pioneer in psychiatry, was talking to an alcoholic patient. This, in effect, is what happened. The patient, a prominent American businessman, had gone the typical alcoholic route. He had exhausted the possibilities of medicine and psychiatry in the United States and had then come to Dr. Jung as to a court of last resort. Jung had treated him for a year, and the patient, whom we shall call Mr. R., felt confident that the hidden springs underneath his compulsion to drink had been discovered and removed.
So you've heard some of this before. Maybe this is slightly different. So this comes from another source, and I'll give it to you a little bit later on. We talk about legendary elements. So Carl Jung had not treated Roland for a year. Bill was bad with dates and names and sometimes facts and figures, but Roland did spend just about 90 days with Carl Jung in Zurich in 1926.
Nevertheless, he found himself intoxicated within a short time after leaving Dr. Jung's care. Now he was back in a state of black despair. He asked Jung what the score was, and he got it. In substance, Dr. Jung said, "For some time after you came here, I continued to believe that you might be one of those rare cases who could make a recovery. But I must now frankly tell you that I have never seen a single case recover through psychiatric art where the neurosis is so severe as yours. Medicine has done all that it can for you, and that's where you stand." Mr. R's depression deepened. He asked, "Is there no exception? Is this really the end of the line for me?"
So it's interesting that in this particular talk, Bill uses the word neurosis, right? And, some people may push back against that. Is alcoholism a neurosis? Well, here in this particular talk, Bill is calling it a neurosis, and he's got a reason to do so, and we'll get there.
Well, replied the doctor, there are some exceptions, a very few. Here and there, once in a while, alcoholics have had what are called vital spiritual experiences. They appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and rearrangements. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes which were once the guiding forces of these men are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. In fact, I have been trying to produce some such emotional rearrangement with you. With many types of neurotics, the methods which I employ are successful, but I have never been successful with an alcoholic of your description. But, protested the patient, I'm a religious man, and I still have faith.
So you can see how this very closely mirrors what's written in chapter 2 of the Big Book, in fact, word for word in many, many places. But then he uses that word neurotics again. Isn't that interesting?
To this, Dr. Jung replied, ordinary religious faith isn't enough. What I'm talking about is a transforming experience, a conversion experience, if you like. I can only recommend that you place yourself in the religious atmosphere of your own choice, that you recognize your personal hopelessness, and that you cast yourself upon whatever God you think there is. The lightning of the transforming experience of conversion may then strike you. This you must try. It is your only way out. So spoke a great and humble physician. For the AA to be, this was a 10 strike. Science had pronounced Mr. R virtually hopeless. Dr. Jung's words had struck him at great depth, producing an immense deflation of his ego.
So, interesting, and I remember when we did the Gist of James, we talked about deflation at depth, and here Bill is now kind of using the same phraseology, talking about Carl Jung.
Deflation at death is today a cornerstone principle of AA. There in Dr. Jung's office, it was first employed in our behalf. The patient, Mr. R., chose the Oxford group of that day as his religious association and atmosphere. Terribly chastened and almost hopeless, he began to be active with it. To his intense joy and astonishment, the obsession to drink presently left him.
Interesting, right? So, they're talking about, Roland choosing the Oxford group, but I really like this line. Terribly chastened and almost hopeless, he began to be active with it. This thing seems to work best when your ass is completely kicked, right? So, terribly chastened, what a nice way to say it. He got under the lash, right? So in 12 and 12, under the lash of alcoholism, you're driven to AA. And then if you get involved, right, you get active with it, look what happens, right? To his intense joy and astonishment, the obsession got lifted. Now, by the way, so this comes from Bill's 3 talks to the medical societies. So this is Bill, and I think this was the 1949 talk. I could be wrong. It could have been, he did another one in 56, but that's why he's using the word neurosis and neurotics. He's talking to a bunch of psychiatrists, and Bill was always good, about using words, in Akron, he had said the word, religious conversion at one time. And of course, in New York, he would use the word spiritual experience or spiritual awakening. Bill was always good about tailoring his talk to his audience.
Returning to America, Roland came upon an old school friend of mine, a chronic alcoholic. This friend, whom we shall call Ebby, was about to be committed to a state mental hospital. At this juncture, another vital ingredient was added to the AA synthesis. Mr. R., the alcoholic, began talking to Ebby, also an alcoholic and a kindred sufferer. This made for identification at depth with the second cardinal AA principle. Over this bridge of identification, Mr. R. passed Jung's verdict of how hopeless, medically and psychiatrically, most alcoholics were. He then introduced Ebby to the Oxford group, where my friend promptly sobered up.
In speaking of religion, I must make it clear from the start what I mean by that term. Religion, as the Latin word denotes, is a careful and scrupulous observation of what Rudolf Otto aptly termed the numinosum, that is, a dynamic existence or effect, not caused by an arbitrary act of will. On the contrary, it seizes and controls the human subject, which is always rather its victim than creator.
Wow, how interesting that is. Rudolf Otto had written a book, I believe the name of it was The Idea of the Holy, where Otto, tried to describe God, and he used the word numinosum, right, to describe God. And so, look, obviously, the idea of the old man with the staff holding a lamb, and he's got a beautiful white beard and a white robe. Hey, if that works for you, fine. I wouldn't want to say that might be, how do I do this nicely? So that might be a limited concept. So here Otto's saying, it's something much more dynamic, okay? And it's never part of the arbitrary will. And just like James said, I think James used words like it brings its votary, right? Votary means victim. Look, Carl Jung's using the same language here. Isn't that amazing? But James says that it brings its votary to the radiant core. So here, speaking of religion, I must make it clear what I mean by that, okay?
Religion appears to me to be a peculiar attitude of the human mind, which could be formulated in accordance with the original use of the term religio, That is, a careful consideration and observation of certain dynamic factors, understood to be powers, spirits, demons, gods, laws, ideas, ideals of whatever name man had given to such factors as he has found in his world powerful, dangerous, or helpful enough to be taken into careful consideration, or grand, beautiful, and meaningful enough to be devoutly adored and loved.
I love that word devout, because that brings in with devotion, which is unceasing dedication to a principle or a person or a cause.
In colloquial language, one often says of somebody who is enthusiastically interested in a certain pursuit that he is almost religiously devoted to his cause. William James, for instance, remarks that a scientist often has no creed, but his temper is devout.
So here Carl Jung, in his writing, invokes William James. And, a lot of people don't know that I think it was 1909, Carl Jung actually met William James and spent a couple of evenings with him talking. And I believe this was at the Clark, is it Clark University, the Clark Conference? Anyway, Jung had nothing but great things to say about William James. And there's no doubt that William James's thinking, especially on matters of spirituality and religion, were quite the influence on Carl Jung. They use the word enthusiastically interested in a certain pursuit. So a couple of things come to mind. We get a newcomer who comes in, maybe gets a little taste, a little bit of a spiritual experience going, and he's on fire. Isn't it wonderful? The word enthusiasm, and Norman Vincent Peale wrote a great book called Enthusiasm Makes the Difference. But the word itself comes from the Greek entheos, which could be translated infused with God. So when you're enthusiastic and you're on fire and you're carrying a message, you are, lit up by, what Carl Jung might say, powers, demons, spirits, whatever you want to call it. Labels are, of course, just labels. That's all they are, to help us communicate a concept to each other. The idea of the numinosum is ineffable, meaning that it cannot be put into words.
I want to make it clear that by the term religion, I do not mean a creed. It is, however, true that on one hand, every confession is originally based on the experience of the numinosum, and on the other hand, upon the loyalty, trust, and confidence toward a definitely experienced numinous effect and the subsequent alteration of consciousness. The conversion of Paul is a striking example of this. Religion, it might be said, is the term that designates the attitude peculiar to a consciousness which has been altered by the experience of the numinosum.
So, he talks about the conversion of Paul. So, you guys can certainly, if you're not familiar with what that is, on the story is on the road to Damascus, Paul was heading to persecute Christians, and he had a vision of Jesus, and Jesus saying to Paul, "Why are you persecuting?" Right? And Paul was struck blind. Once his sight came back, Paul was a changed man. So could you call that a spiritual experience or a spiritual awakening? I think you can. I like this last paragraph because you know what it makes me think of? So when Ebby came to visit Bill, and, Bill said, "So Ebby, what's up? You look great." And simply but smilingly, Ebby looked at Bill and said, "What? I've got religion." So, and he may have been saying it almost exactly what he's not saying. I've got church and I got the prayers down. He said, I've got this attitude that my consciousness has been altered by. Right? And that's what people meant when they said, I've got religion. It means, I am now enthusiastic about, something new. A consciousness that's been altered by what? An experience of God, right? Something divine.
Creeds are codified and dogmatized forms of original religious experience. The contents of the experience have become sanctified and usually congealed in a rigid, often elaborate structure. The practice and reproduction of the original experience have become a ritual and unchangeable institution. This does not necessarily mean a lifeless petrifaction. On the contrary, it can become the form of religious experience for ages of time, for millions of people without there being any vital necessity for alteration.
So I'll go back to William James here, right? So William James said there's two kinds of religion: institutional religion and personal religion. So here Carl Jung is describing what we could call organized religion, the church or any other number of organized institutions. They are all based on somebody's original spiritual experience, right? But then, they've dogmatized them and created all of this code and structure and rules around it. Now, we should never poo-poo that, okay? Because that forms a form of spiritual experience for millions of people that do quite well with it. Why don't we do well with it? Because we needed a different kind of religion, right? That's what William James had said. There's the once born and the twice born. And the once born, hey, they don't have a problem. They're born in life with a bottle or two of champagne ascribed to their credit. Well, we popped the cork and drank it, and we were miserable, right? So we're the twice born. We need a different kind of experience.
Our usual materialistic conception of the psyche is, I am afraid, not particularly helpful in neurotic cases. If only the soul were endowed with a subtle body, then one could say at least that this breath or smoke body was suffering from a real, though somewhat airy cancer, in much the same way as the gross material body could be subject to a similar ailment. There would be at least be something real. Medicine, therefore, feels a strong dislike toward anything of a cyclical nature. Either the body is ill or there is nothing the matter. And if you cannot prove that the body is really diseased, that is because our present means do not enable the physician to find the true nature of the undoubtedly organic trouble.
Again, so this is written some time ago, and of course the medical arts have progressed significantly since then. But the idea that maybe neurosis or alcoholism or any number of let's call it behavioral health illnesses were psychiatric, medicine didn't like that idea. They always thought there's something wrong with the body, right? So, and even here at the end, he says organic trouble. So, what is alcoholism? I'm sure we've all thought about that. We could probably have 3,000 meetings discussing that topic and probably, never come up with an answer. But, we do know that with behavioral illness, a lot of it has to do with brain chemistry, but we don't have a finger on what that is. Now, by the way, if there's an issue with brain chemistry, that is organic. When you are taking a pill to try to bring those chemical levels into some type of harmony, that's an organic solution, by the way. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I think, what we found from James, especially when he talks about, the cure for dipsomania is religiomania. We're not in the realm of the physical.
But the human soul seems to harbor mysteries, since an empiricist, all religious experience boils down to a particular condition of the mind. If we want to know anything of what religious experience means to those who have it, we have every chance nowadays of studying every imaginable form of it. And if it means anything, it means everything to those who have it.
So, this is real important. And one of Jung's writings, and it's not in this presentation, but let's just say you're having a discussion and you've had an experience of the numinosum, and the person you're talking to has not. Well, the conversation pretty much ends right there because you've had it and they haven't. Anyone who has had a spiritual experience, and remember, there's, James said, there's the kind that come quickly and there's the kind that come slowly as the result of building up a new set of habits, piece by piece. But regardless of how you've gotten, I think if you have it, you recognize you've had it, and it means everything to you. So I'll share with you folks, I have had both experiences. I had a very powerful experience many, many years ago that sobered me up in a heartbeat. And then I've also had the experience that, so Bill Wilson called the educational divide. And I'm going to tell you, it means everything to me. Which one is more valuable? Can't tell you. They're both very, very valuable. But, when Bill had his white light experience in the town's hospital, what did he do with it right away? Did he keep it to himself or just him and Lois? No. He was compelled into action. And that's what spiritual experience will do. The truest mark of a spiritual experience is the absolute inability to keep it to yourself. So we'll see this in a little bit, but, the only radical remedy for dipsomania is religiomania. And I'm going to tell you, it's my interpretation that it takes the power of God to overcome the power of alcohol.
Religion is a relationship to the highest or strongest value, be it positive or negative. The relationship is voluntary as well as involuntary. That is, you can accept consciously the value by which you are possessed unconsciously. That psychological fact, which is the greatest power in your system, is the God, since it is always the overwhelming psychic factor which is called God. As soon as God ceases to be an overwhelming factor, he becomes a mere name. His essence is dead and his power is gone.
We talk about the power of God. That's something that we can meditate on to see what that means. But let's just look at what Jung is saying here. So whatever the greatest power in your system is God. And I love in the big book, he talks about, so deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. Now, it may be obscured by what? By calamity, by power, by worship of other things. Like what? Money. Can money be your God? Oh yeah. Can alcohol be your God or other non-conference approved substances? Yes, they can. And whatever is at the center of your being and attention, that is God. And if anything other than God is at the center where God is supposed to be, you're going to find yourself pretty powerless when it comes to God.
There are some people whose attitude is essentially spiritual and others whose attitude is essentially materialistic. It must not be assumed that such an attitude is accidentally acquired or springs from some misunderstanding. These attitudes show themselves as ingrained passions which no criticism or persuasion can stamp out. There are even cases where an outspoken materialism has its source in the denial of a religious disposition.
So I've always believed that we alcoholics are very, very special. When we came out, we were given an extra helping of spirituality into our being. And if we don't find some way in our life of developing it, I think we find ourselves, as he describes here in the ladder, finding ourselves pursuing materialism as a way of denying the spiritual.
The human psyche is highly equivocal. In every single case, we must consider the question whether an attitude or so-called habitus exists in its own right, or is perhaps only a compensation for the opposite.
Wow. You know, I was raised in Catholic school. I was an altar boy. I actually wanted to be a priest when I was younger, but, I kind of liked the attention that those folks got. But, I realized much, much later in life that part of the problem was they were trying to give me an experience from a book or a number of books and through a ritual, through a lot of things. And it just didn't quite, it's like giving me a drink and saying you can smell it, but you can't drink it. Oh, geez, but I want it inside me. So here, what's Jung saying? Habitus, habit, my alcoholism. Is it just a compensation because I can't find the real deal?
However far-fetched it may sound, experience shows that many neuroses are caused by the fact that people blind themselves to their own religious promptings because of a childish passion for rational enlightenment. The psychologists today ought to realize once and for all that we are no longer dealing with questions of dogma and creed. A religious attitude is an element in the psychic life whose importance can hardly be overrated, and it is precisely for the religious outlook that the sense of historical continuity is indispensable.
So, and be careful. He's not saying a religious attitude is, the need to go to church. And he's saying, look, deep down in every man, woman, and child, you have this fundamental idea. It has nothing to do with dogma and creed. And if you can't find and get in touch with that element, you may end up in trouble in your psychic life.
If you sum up what people tell you about their experience, you can formulate it about in this way. They came to themselves, they could accept themselves, they were able to become reconciled to themselves, and by this, they were also reconciled to adverse circumstances and events. This is much like what was formerly expressed by the saying, "He has made his peace with God. He has sacrificed his own will. He has submitted himself to the will of God."
So this is almost pure big book here, right? I mean, we can all, I think, see the similarities. And again, now these particular writings, they're coming from primarily two books from Carl Jung. One of the books was titled Religion and Psychology, and the other book was titled Modern Man in Search of the Soul. If I remember right, one was from the 30s prior to the Big Book, and the other one was the early 40s after the Big Book. So obviously, anything here, if it was written in the 30s, could Bill have read it? Yes. I don't have any knowledge that he did, but, certainly you see similar ideas that are expressed here as expressed in the Big Book. And there's no doubt that Carl Jung's treatment of Roland Hazard did influence the big book because Roland's story is foundational to the entire program.
There is nothing that can free us from this bond except that opposite urge of life, the Spirit. It is not the children of the flesh, but the children of God who know freedom.
Wow, pretty powerful. Right? Can a man be born again?
Can a man be born again? For thousands of years, rites of initiation have been teaching spiritual rebirth. Yet strangely enough, man forgets again and again the meaning of divine procreation.
You know, when I went over this morning, I meant to pull out a document. It's a story called The 5 M's, and it's written by a guy, maybe some of you know him, Bill Wigmore, who used to run Austin Recovery. But the story of the 5 M's is an amazing story, and I'm not going to do it because I'll screw it up. I'd have to go back and reread it. But the crux of this parable, the story, is that we always forget. But every now and then, a man comes along who takes us back, right? And here was Bill Wilson. He may just have been one of those men.
There is surely no evidence of a strong life of the Spirit, and yet the penalty of misunderstanding is heavy, for it is nothing less than neurotic decay, embitterment, atrophy, and sterility. It is easy enough to drive the Spirit out the door, but when we have done so, the salt of life grows flat. It loses its savor. Fortunately, we have proof that the Spirit always renews its strength in the fact that the central teaching of the ancient initiations is handed on from generation to generation. Ever and again, human beings arise who understand what is meant by the fact that God is our Father.
And in the story of the 5 M's, so obviously it talks about Buddha, it talks about Jesus, it talks about Moses, right? So these are men that they're talking about. It talks about Frank Bookman. It talks about Bill Wilson. Men that have had spiritual experiences of some type that then forms the basis of some type of spiritual movement. And Bill knew all this because he said AA ought never be organized. Why? He didn't want to codify. He didn't want AA becoming the church. Now, the folks at Akron were a little different. They kind of thought of this as religion, and Bill would cringe. Don't call it that, because we don't ever want to be in competition with the other religions. But why should we never get organized? Because then it'll become a lifeless petrifaction, as Carl Jung had said.
No matter what the world thinks of religious experience, the one who has it possesses the great treasures of a thing that has provided him with a source of life, meaning, and beauty, and that has given a new splendor to the world and to mankind. He has pistis and peace. Where is the criterion by which you could say that such a life is not legitimate, that such experience is not valid, and that such pistis is mere illusion?
So I remember, I think it was Lenin, maybe it was Marx, right? So religion is the opium of the masses. No, how are you going to say that? To the person who's had a spiritual experience, we have pistis, meaning a knowledge, a faithful knowledge that cannot be disputed. So who has the right to say that that's a mere illusion? It's not. And, so Bill had his spiritual experience, and some people might say, well, that was a belladonna hallucination. And I'll answer, well, maybe it was. But who's to say God can't use a hallucination to achieve his purpose? And by the way, by the fruit you will know the tree. What did he do with that experience? He took it out there and tried to give it to others. That fell from a good tree. There's just no way around it.
The thing that cures a neuroses must be as convincing as the neuroses, and since the latter is only too real, the helpful experience must be of equal reality.
So this is great, and I remember when I read it, it just kind of, touched me. So it takes a bigger neurosis to cure a neurosis. And there's William James with the only remedy I know for dipsomania is religiomania. And I'm going to tell you, when a newcomer catches fire, what happens? You've got a cure in progress. And don't get pissed off I use the word cure. I use it in the sense that the old folks used it. I've been healed, right? Who heals all thy diseases? The only radical remedy for dipsomania is religiomania. So now, after AA came of age in 1955, Bill Wilson realized, I'd like to close the loop with a lot of people. And so when AA came of age, he was dispensing co-founder titles to guys like William James and Carl Jung and Dr. Silkworth and Sam Shoemaker. And I certainly support that thinking. They were all co-founders, and their own piece of this thing came into the greater good. So Wilson wrote a letter to Carl Jung in 1961, and you could find that letter in GSO, and you could also find it at Stepping Stones. So I'm going to show you some of the text. And by the way, all of this is in language of the heart as well. So Bill begins his letter introducing himself as a co-founder of the society known as Alcoholics Anonymous. He reminds Jung of how his treatment back in the early 30s of a man named Roland H. and how he had declared him a hopeless alcoholic, incurable on the basis of any medical or psychiatric treatment. He went on to tell Jung how Roland had found his spiritual solution in the Oxford groups, and how the message of hopelessness for recovery on a non-spiritual basis had reached him through his boyhood friend Evie via Roland and their association with the Oxford group. Bill told Jung of his conversion experience in the town's hospital, his verification of the experience by reading William James and VRE, and his subsequent vision of a society of alcoholics, each identifying with and transmitting his experience to the next chain stop. So he closed by thanking Jung for his great perception and humility by saying the concept of hopelessness and deflation at depth had proved to be the foundation of Alcoholics Anonymous. Conversion experiences, nearly every variety, were now available on a widespread basis. A few weeks later, Carl Jung wrote back to Bill Wilson, much to Bill's amazement. And the things that Jung had to say were very incredible.
His craving for alcohol was the equivalent, on a low level, of the spiritual thirst of our being for wholeness, expressed in medieval language, the union with God. The only right and legitimate way to such an experience is that it happens to you in reality, and it can only happen to you when you walk on a path which leads you to a higher understanding. You might be led to that goal by an act of grace, or through a personal and honest contact with friends, or through a higher education of the mind, beyond the confines of mere rationalism. I see from your letter that Roland H. has chosen the second way, which was, under the circumstances, obviously the best one.
So he starts off by saying what I said before, right? So our craving for alcohol is a search for God or the spiritual gone wrong, right? And Carl Jung says that. So then he says, so the only way you kind of get this thing or get turned around is when you walk on a path that leads you to a higher understanding. So, we're on this broad highway, right? So the three ways you may be led to that goal by an act of grace. So that was Bill Wilson in the town's hospital, right? He was in the right place at the right time. The lightning struck and he had an immediate change. Or you may get there through a personal and honest contact with friends. So that's the fellowship idea. What do we do in the fellowship? We together work on our issues. It's connectivity through collectivity. And that's an amazing thing. And that's how the Oxford Group is as well. Or a higher education of the mind beyond the confines of irrationalism. And that kind of reminds me of my LSD days when I was certainly seeking beyond the confines of mere rationalism, but I don't think that is what Jung meant. So that would be, meditation through deep contemplation, where you're getting an education of the mind and guidance that's beyond mere rationalism.
I am strongly convinced that the evil principle prevailing in this world leads the unrecognized spiritual need into perdition, if it is not counteracted either by real religious insight or by protective wall of human community. An ordinary man not protected by an action from above and isolated in society cannot resist the power of evil, which is called very aptly the devil. But the use of such words arouses so many mistakes that one can only keep aloof from them as much as possible.
Right, keep aloof, meaning I'm not going to go out there publicly and probably say all this, but doesn't mean that that's not what I don't know, right? I love the word evil and devil. Drop the D and what do you have? So he's strongly convinced that if we're not either protected through real experience or a wall of human community. Wow, AA could be called a wall of human community because it protects a lot of people that are still working up towards that experience. So it's incredible that Jung is sharing all this with Wilson.
These are the reasons why I could not give a full and sufficient explanation to Roland Hazard, but I am risking it with you, because I conclude from your very decent and honest letter that you have acquired a point of view above the misleading platitudes one usually hears about alcoholism.
And hopefully we all today, as a result of some of this, right, have a view above a lot of the misleading platitudes that one usually hears. So now here's the pièce de résistance, right? This is what Jung tells Wilson that when I read it, my recovery became complete.
You see, alcohol in Latin is spiritus, and you use the same word for the highest religious experience as well as the most depraving poison. The helpful formula, therefore, is spiritus contra spiritum.
Isn't that amazing? You use the same word for God and alcohol in Latin. That's not by accident.
Among all my patients in the second half of life, that is to say over 35, there has not been a single one whose problem is in the last resort was not that of finding a religious outlook on life. It is safe to say that every one of them fell ill because he had lost that which the living religions of every age have given their followers, and none of them has been really healed who did not regain his religious outlook.
And for someone who has trouble with the word religious, now here's a great way to substitute spiritual for religious. But I'm going to also say, come step 10, we cease fighting anyone or anything, right? Because they're just labels. That's all they are. And I love what he said. There's nothing that can free us from this bond except the opposite urge of life, the spirit. It's not the children of the flesh, but the children of God who know freedom. So what have we learned? Both James and Young are in sync. The only radical remedy for dipsomania is religio man. Spiritus contra spiritum takes the power of God to overcome the power of alcohol. So I'm going to close with this. Nobody can know what the ultimate things are. We must therefore take them as we experience them. And if such experience helps to make your life healthier, more beautiful, more complete, and more satisfactory to yourself and those you love, you may safely say, this was the grace of God.
Wow, thank you, John B. in New Jersey. Please unmute yourselves. What great work, John. Thank you. Great service. Well done, John.
John,
Please
that was
unmute.
beautiful.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you, John. That was excellent.
Thank you, John. That was beautiful.
Very cool.
Very good, John.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Excellent.
Thank you, John. Fabulous.
Now, by the way, if that felt good, come back next week, because part 3 is Dr. Silkworth, and it's very much in the same vein. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank the folks that helped to narrate that presentation that was recorded many years ago. Bill McNiff was our Bill Wilson, and Bill McNiff had done the play Moments that maybe some of you are familiar with. And Carl Jung, I picked a guy who was very articulate, but he didn't have a European accent, and I probably, missed that. But when I heard this guy speak, I said, well, I think I can place the face with the voice. It worked okay. So I hope you guys it all worked okay as well.
John, would it help if we put up the 5 M's? And would you read the 5 M's for him if I got them up on the screen? Would you read them?
Yes, I would. So you found it?
I have got it, John. Yeah, I have got it. Let me just Rob, will you tell people what we have coming up, and I'll just do this. I'll just get up on the screen now. Thanks, Rob.
Yeah. More on Sunday at 1:30 Eastern time. We're going to have Writing the Big Book. It's going to be the Rockefeller dinner, and I'll have the flyer up there shortly. Next Thursday, the Bobby B presentation, Reading the Book, will be happening. And that will be at, I believe, 3:30. I will be putting up the time change, etc., up so that everybody can have it. Also, get on the Growing and Understanding email list so that you get the emails of all the upcoming presentations so you don't miss any. And with that, David, I think you got it all now.
And Rob, thank you for your service as well. John, I'll leave it with you. This is from a website here. John, we might want to mention that, justloveaudio.com. So just to give them a shout out. John, this is 5 M's. Do you want to read it, John?
Sure, I will. So, and the theme behind this is how the machine can replace the message. And the story of the 5 M's, it's the story of what happens to spiritual institutions, almost any spiritual institution over time. As soon as I had heard it, I understood the program and my own recovery differently. I hope you may as well. Every spiritual institution starts with a man. So that's the first M, right? And that man could be Jesus or Buddha or Frank Bookman or Bill Wilson. The man has a spiritual experience. Might be Jesus being baptized at the River Jordan, Buddha finding enlightenment under the banyan tree, Frank Bookman experiencing the power of the cross in a little church in England, or Wilson's white light experience while detoxing at Towns Hospital. Each man has a direct encounter with the divine. His consciousness is awakened to what the Big Book calls the fourth dimension of reality. It's the spiritual experience, which is the goal of the 12 steps. And what happens to each man as the result of his encounter is he comes back changed. Each has a wholly new perspective on his relationship with God, himself, other human beings, and his life work. And so each changed man then tries to carry the message. That's the second M, to those around him. He really has no choice but to do so, as the message exerts such a powerful hold on him that he wouldn't be complete if he didn't share the good news. And it's so important to understand that the message he carries isn't that the man who received it is special and unique, right? The message is not look at me. The message is look at me and look what's happened to me. So he carried that he's awakened to a reality that's readily available to all who remove their blinders and come to see and experience it for themselves. Jesus called it the kingdom of God. Buddha termed it enlightenment or nirvana, and Bookman called it being maximal or fully surrendered. AA members call it serenity or recovery. For those who hear it, if they're ready for it, the message carried resonates deep inside. Those who hear it, they too are attracted to it. Once they know almost immediately that it is a message directed to them and their future path is clear. They must follow the same path as the man who carried the message. And this is born the third M, the movement. Now we have Jesus with an ever-growing band of disciples, Buddha with his merry little band of monks, Bookman with his dedicated Oxford group members, and Wilson with the first 100 sober alcoholics. This is the glorious heyday of the movement as we all try to pass on the life-changing message of the founder's experience to an awaiting world. It's a critical time when the group is often viewed initially as a cult and a threat to the established order of things, but then finds greater respectability with increased numbers and leaders able to carry on the work of transformation, even after the death of its founder. Before long, however, as the young movement grows in both membership and complexity, it is presented with an increasing number of issues that call for clarification and group conformity. The message must now be organized and codified so false prophets and false doctrines don't arise to lead the group astray. The message must also be written down and protected for future generations. And by the way, that's one of the reasons they wrote the Big Book, right? So now come the attorneys, the secretaries, the theologians. They comprise the fourth M, the machine. Pink Floyd's got a song out there, Welcome to the Machine, you know, it's so true. And the job of the machine is to create traditions, formulas, rituals that capture the spirit of the founder. And so we have the bishops, the Bibles, the creeds, the church, the abbots, the monasteries, a foundation in a castle in Switzerland set up to the Oxford Group, the Big Book, the New York Central Office. Now, the machine is absolutely necessary for the continuation of the movement, but over time, what invariably happens through machines is the machinery replaces the message. The law replaces the spirit. People go through the motions, but the power and the mystery are gone. What did Carl Jung say? The power is gone. The soul goes flat. It loses its flavor. The machine can water down the message. I knew the machine was at work in a 12-step meeting I attended in Tennessee. A woman was playing solitaire at the table, and at 5 p.m. the meeting was about to start. When the time for the meeting arrived, she opened the meeting with the Serenity Prayer while she continued to deal her cards. The machine has arrived. She would go through the motions, but there was no real meeting. I was also reminded of it when I visited Bill Wilson's birthplace in Vermont several years ago. Someone, I'm sure, with good intention had placed a lamp over the spot where Bill had been born. And by the way, they never let that lamp go out. Now we have a perpetual light shining. Good work, machine. No doubt in a few hundred years, there'll be the sacred coffee pot from the first AA group in Akron, and we'll all be rubbing it, trying to get a little bit of sobriety, right? Maybe making the sign on a newcomer's head. So rather than encouraging newcomers to go through the same transforming experience, the machine simply takes us through the motions. Left unchecked, the machine will grind on, spewing out new laws, literature, mindless but obedience adherents who follow the form but miss the message. And that's the fifth M, mausoleum. Power is dead. Power of the movement is dead. It has no spiritual energy to inspire and transforms lives. And then what happens? Other men come back to the first M. And that's what Carl Jung was saying. Thank God. Time and time again, men come back who get the fact that God is our Father. And this may be the time for each of us to look to the experience of Jesus, Buddha, Bookman, and Bill and ask, have I had the experience that they experienced? Or have I just put those guys on a pedestal, read a quote or two, parrot what I hear in the AA meetings, right? And that was Father Bill Wigmore, Western Recovery. Bill, I have not spoken to Bill in many, many years. A wonderful man, a very warm man. He used to go to the AA history symposiums. I'm sure a few of you may have met him. But thanks for pulling that up, David. And I hope that story had some meaning for some of you folks.
Great work. Thank you, John B. Thanks for reading. I really appreciate it. Let's go to some Q&A, John, and we'll go to Dave B. Dave.
Thanks. Yeah, that was great, John. You know, I had a spiritual awakening, I believe, a spiritual experience 30 years ago. You know, I'm sober a little over 30 years. It was February 2nd. I went into a treatment place, and I had, you know, read the book before, but a lot, you know, I have a hard time comprehending things where I had to read that more and more. But when I was in the treatment center 30 years ago, there was something that said in my mind when they were up there on the podiums that I had lost the control of that drinking. And it said to myself that I didn't ever have to take another drink. And it was really a belief of Alcoholics Anonymous because other people had stayed sober 25 years and so forth. And I really believed that. And then after that, I didn't tell anybody that happened to me, but I was looking around. There was like 50 to 75 people in this treatment place, and people were just going every which way. And I'm there, and I didn't try to control any of that. I was just trying to stay, you know, out of trouble. And, you know, and I realized that was what Roland Hazard had at this Carl Jung, you know, that's basically what it was. And I've stayed sober on that, you know, really. And, it's pretty amazing. But I mean, what you read and all that's just a great read. I don't comprehend a lot of it, but it was great story. So I appreciate it. Thank you all.
Thank you for sharing that, Dave.
Thank you, Dave. Any comments? People want to make a comment? We can stop the recording. If you don't want to come in on the record, just let me know. I'll pause the recording if you don't want to be recorded. Thank you, Jack. Jump in now, Jack.
So I want to thank John B. again for the presentation, which I thought was exceptional. And one of the things that I thought was really controversial was when he started talking about evil and the devil, because that is largely a taboo subject at this point in time. And I just found that to be extraordinarily interesting. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing it. So, by the way, you could read the entire letter, both letters, in the language of the heart, and I would certainly encourage everyone to do that.
Thanks, Jack. Just reminds me, John, if I may just come in, you said that when we became subjects of King Alcohol, I've always associated King Alcohol in my mind as being that association you just mentioned there. But let's go to Hazel Madden. Thank you, Hazel.
Thank you, David. Thank you, John, for your presentation. Thank you, Rob, for your service. I wanted to ask you, you said that Roland Hazard in 1926 went to see Carl Jung, and it was a 90-day stay. And all of the information that I have heard was that he stayed a year and then came back. It wasn't sustainable. His sobriety wasn't sustainable, and he went back to see him again. So I'm wondering, what's your source for the 90-day stay?
So, and very great question. And so in my presentation, I mentioned legendary. I had done a talk many, many years ago, and I talked about the parable of Roland Hazard. And, it really is a parable. It's meant to teach a spiritual lesson. But there were a couple of researches several years back. So first, and again, now I'm talking off the cuff, so old age can get me here. So Dubiel's book came out, The Road to Fellowship. It had more stuff on Roland Hazard. This is around 2004. A psychologist by the name of Amy Blum had done a lot of research on Roland, and they went into the, Rhode Island Historical Society. They found letters. They found Roland's calendar. They found canceled checks, and all of that. And then this woman she's a nurse, but she's actually a bit of an AA historian, although she's a civilian. So she writes under the name Cora Finch. And I'll just say her real name is Laura, and I'll protect her anonymity, and I won't give her last name. But she put out some great writings on Roland. So there's actually letters that say, Roland arrived in Zurich on this day. And his wife was with him, by the way. So Jung psychoanalyzed both of them. And it wasn't quite 90 days. It was a couple of days short of 90 days. It might have been 87 days, might have been 88 days. But it's all documented in Roland's letters. So, how did it become a year? Did that get confused by Ebby when he told Bill? Did Bill just, be Bill when he's terrible with names and dates and all that stuff? Could it be that 88 days wasn't sexy enough, so it became 1 year? The exact nature is unknown. Now, the other thing is nobody knows for sure when Roland went back to Carl Jung or how he went back. That is still undetermined. It sure sounds like in the big book that it's all laid out. It also sounds like Roland never had another problem again, because in 1938, when Bill's writing, he's saying, and he's a free man, he can go anywhere. Well, he didn't mention that Roland had several relapses from the time, Jung first treated him. Even after he went back the second time, Roland had additional relapses. He was no poster child for Alcoholics Anonymous. He never really did join AA. Roland did good as long as he stayed active. And, and sometimes that's the nature of this thing, right? Cunning, baffling, and powerful. It's not the alcohol that's cunning, but it's this thing right up here. So as long as Roland stayed centered and he was active, he did okay, apparently. But it is now well documented, to answer your question, when he was with Carl Jung. That writing that I mentioned before, this Golden Road of Devotion, there's a chapter devoted to that. And, sometime in the future it may come out and you may see more information.
Now, you said that religion was different and that they had a different meaning for religion.
Ask him a question, because questions is we're going to get into a discussion. Can you just ask him in a question, because it becomes a discussion?
Well, David, that's what I was getting ready to do. I was leading up to my question.
We have other people there. So
is that okay?
Well, normally it's one question, then we go around the cycle. You know that. You know how it works.
Let's just leave it at one question and go on to the next person.
You can email me, Zell. Thank you.
Thank you, John. David B.
Okay. Thank you, David. My name's David. I'm an alcoholic. I'll be brief if I can. I used to study Jung in Philadelphia for a few years. I ran a Jungian study group every month. We'd bring in psychoanalysts like from New York City. So I got pretty well versed. That boat that Freud and Jung rode to the U.S. to visit Clark University, that was the name of that. And it's really fascinating, this whole, idea, because it wasn't limited to just esoteric thoughts. For instance, Freud had the sexual theory. He came out with that before anyone else. Then Jung emphasized meaning as his analytic approach. And
do you have the question? Rather, we can have a discussion after this.
So I was just wondering if you'd had any opinion on Jung's emphasis on things like fairy tales, myths, archetypes, and if you'd read his autobiography, Memories, Dreams, and Reflections. Thank you.
So I would have to honestly admit I haven't. And, folks like you have dived into all aspects of Jung. So my readings have been limited to a lot of the spiritual stuff. And, from what I gather, thank God, Jung had that spiritual side, because as a result of that, hey, look, he could have told Roland a whole different story. He could have said the issues come from your mother and you're blessed. He said, no, your problem is that you're looking for God in a bottle, right? To paraphrase. And he said to Roland, go find a religious experience. So Roland ended up getting involved in the Oxford group through his cousins, because they too had been psychoanalyzed by Carl Jung. Look, had Roland not gotten into the Oxford group, we may not be on this Zoom right now. So I'm grateful that Jung's take on this was a spiritual one. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, David B. And we're going to Hugh H., Top of the Hill Group.
Hey, everyone. I'm an alcoholic. My name's Hugh. John, thank you so much. That was great. I believe I read somewhere that one of Carl Jung's books was pretty widely read in early AA. And I thought it was, what was the one, Man in His Search for the Soul? But that was written in 1945, so maybe I'm thinking of a different one. But the Golden Road of Devotion. I've been looking for other chapters of that all my life. I didn't know who wrote it. Now I do. And I think I gather from what you said that it's not available as a complete package anywhere, right?
That's correct.
Well, I would love to see it. I would happily buy it if it was. Thank you.
I may just, thank you for all that you do to contribute to AA history. And as a result of what you just said, I'd watch your inbox over the weekend. Who knows what might show up.
Thanks, John.
Hugh. Wade, thanks for waiting.
Yes, good evening, everyone. I'm Wade. I'm alcoholic. Thanks, John, for your excellent presentation. At one point in this, the idea of the devil was injected, and I wonder how that relates, to your knowledge, to Jung's shadow self, which he described as, the unconscious, or that part of us that's pushed down, repressed, that can be the source of harm or evil actions on our part. Something similar to what's on page 80 of the 12 and 12 about talking about the violent twists our personalities have encountered through life or whatever. So anyway, the shadow self could be analogous to his interjection, or his concept of the devil or evil, if you will. I have a comment also, but I'll save it for later. So,
thanks for sharing.
Thank you, John. And we're going to Patrick O'D.
Thank you, John. I dug into a lot of that. I just think that the Carl Jung, Roland Hazard parable is the way to approach it, and not waste time, whether they had a tuna fish sandwich or a bowl of soup, and when you dig into it, the way that all of these things work together with the Cousins, the Bacons, and the Keiths, and everybody else, they were all swirling around the same place. And I believe that Wilson needed a name to put into the book that would get people's attention and bring some legitimacy to it. And the Carl Jung theories were nothing new. But his name was well known throughout the world at the time, and it opened the door to it, and that, the story of Roland Hazard, I've dug a lot into him. He was a vehicle for carrying a message. I don't think you're going to find him around. One of the things that always surprised me, and I'll go right to the end, those letters, the dates on the letters, and we're talking 1961. So Bill Wilson writes a letter. I think it was, I forget the time, but it was in early January the 23rd. And the reply goes back on the 30th of January. That's only 7 days from New York to the letter being returned, from Zurich in 1961. I find that remarkable. And I also he died in June of 61. So there's some speculation of whether or not it might have been ghostwritten by one of his assistants at the time. But the whole concept of that you need a spiritual solution is something that's been traveling along, whether it be through medicine with Carl Jung or religion like Bookman and Sam Shoemaker and all those things. It headed us down the same road and kept us within the guardrails. So we're heading in that direction. How we got there specifically is not the miracle. The miracle is that we got there, period. Whatever means necessary, whatever boat you get on is okay. They're all heading in the same direction. And I like your digging into it. I find that Carl Jung is oftentimes misquoted. He was a spiritual person and a religious person, and he believed that there was a God. He didn't have any debates about that type of stuff. He was a good friend for Alcoholics Anonymous. And by tying his name to it, it brought a lot more people in. If you just tied Frank Bookman's name into it, you wouldn't have sold half the copies that first decade. So thank you.
Yeah, if the fruit is good, the tree is good, Patrick. That's how I look at it. Yeah.
Thank you, Patrick. Good man. And Pat, thanks for waiting, Pat. All yours.
Hi, Pat, alcoholic. How you doing, John? Thanks for the invitation. Hey, my question is regarding what you talked about the M with the 5 M's. You implied that AA has machine. The machine is growing. And I don't think it could be avoided. I think even a meeting such as this is part of the expansion of a machine, even though we're trying to fight against it. I don't think there's a way to avoid it. And I have fear what may become of AA, especially a lot of things I saw after starting in 2020. What are your thoughts about the machine in AA and moving forward with our community?
So, and I've always considered myself a student of Joe and Charlie. So I try to focus on the program and the message of the 12 steps, right? So when I try to carry this message, right, that's what Joe McQuaney always said, carry this message, not some message, not my message, not any message. So, that's why I'm a student of the Big Book. That's why I'm a firm believer in AA's early literature. That's where I believe the solution lies. That's why I talk about Carl Jung and William James. And Patrick O'Donnell was absolutely right. We put some big names in the book because, we needed some credibility. But so I've had the experience. The program works. The 12 steps work. And it's a way of living that solved all my problems, not just alcoholism. So I think as long as there's enough of us that continue to carry this message, I think the machine is still out there, but, we'll kind of keep AA on track. Right? Now that doesn't mean some change isn't good, but I also don't think we should completely change everything. For me, it's a gift. I want to pass on a gift unchanged from the way it was given to me. I don't have the right to change it. So that's how I kind of look at it.
Thank you, John. Pat, hopefully see you again. Thank you very much. Tim L., Chattanooga.
I think he's frozen. Oh, there he is.
No, I'm Tim, Chattanooga. Bill Wilson, after some number of years of struggling with depression, coined the terminology of emotional sobriety, which he wrote about in a letter back to someone, which was ultimately published in the Grapevine. Do you consider basically his terminology and what he referred to as emotional sobriety being a more complete understanding or completeness of his original spiritual awakening that he had in his life experience and important to long-term recovery and sobriety?
So without a doubt, I certainly understand and believe in the concept of emotional sobriety. So how you want to describe it or label it is up to you. I do believe, that even though we get sober in the beginning, and whether it's through a powerful spiritual experience like we shared earlier, which, by the way, I had one of those, or it comes as the result of, building up, certainly in the case of Bill Wilson and many others, there's something lacking, right? So something, the promises have not come true. You want to, in my opinion, check your sobriety. Ask yourself the promises in the form of questions. Do you know a new freedom and a new happiness? Has fear of people and economic security left you? And unless you get, perfect answers, and can you get perfect answers? Yes, you can. So there may be something lacking. And Bill said, look, I finally figured out what it was, and I was still trying to basically control everything. And when it didn't go my way, I felt the crushing defeats. And then Sandy Beach once said, the problem is we all have agendas. And when somebody goes against our agenda, we get pissed off, right? So the trick is don't have an agenda. If you have no agenda, nobody can ever go against your agenda. And guess what? You're the hole in the donut then. Zero resistance. No problem. So, yeah, there is an emotional sobriety. And we're all meant to achieve it. That's my understanding and belief.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Tim. And we're going back to Atlanta. Here's O.
Thank you, David. John, do you think when they talked about ingrained passions, the material versus the spiritual, that has some significance with AA now and how people learn?
So the material versus the spiritual, I mean, it has great significance. It had significance then. It has significance now. I think the real meaning of it is, you know, and James said it, there's two lives, the material and the spiritual, and we must lose the one before we can live in the other. Huxley wrote in this great book, okay, the Perennial Philosophy, the more there is of me, the less there is of God. And that's the truth of it. You know, Joe and Charlie would say you can't love and hate at the same time, right? So you're praying for the people you resent because it's a form. You can't have, if you have 1 foot in the material world and 1 foot in the spiritual world, you're on the fence and guess where it's going? Right up the kazoo, right? So we gotta predominate on one side or the other. And, you know, my goal in life is to predominate on the spiritual side. Do I have a halo on? Absolutely not. You know, I got plenty of defects still. If I cooperate with God and work at them, right, they will always materialize if you work for them. You know, I could become, let's say the word is complete. I believe it's possible.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Ezel. I think we finished the question section with Judy Hollis. Hello, Judy. Nice to see you. You want to unmute, Judy? I think you're still. Can you unmute? Yeah, there you go.
I'm a recovering alcoholic. My name is Judy, and I thank you, David. Thank you, John. This was so fabulous. Just really great. I like this thing you were just saying here at the end. I was thinking of there's a Buddhist teacher, the third Chinese patriarch, and he says, the great way is not difficult for he who has no preferences. You know? So if you have no preferences, you're not going to get this anger thing you were just talking about, and no one's going to bother you. And lots of luck with that one. I found in my later recovery that I have to return to Al-Anon because of all these problem people who are my teachers, of course. So what do you think about that? I haven't abandoned my AA recovery for sure, but I've had to focus on what you were just coming to about this control and controlling of the other person's outcome and response and how we deal with that. Can you say some more?
So I think you understand it very, very well. Lately I've been working with a group and we're really concentrating on steps 6 and 7. And we're gonna get into Drop the Rock again, which my group does, but you know, I suffer from impatience. Okay, I want things quick. I don't, you know, if you're off going down a rabbit hole, I'm not looking to hold your hand. So I'm an impatient person. So how do I deal with that? Every day, you know, besides the 3rd step prayer, I'm saying the 7th step prayer, and I'm asking God, help me be patient. Show me the way of love and kindness. And if I keep bringing that thought back into my consciousness throughout the day, I'm doing pretty good. And because I'm cooperating and working at it with God's help, I'm getting results. But you know what? Unless I'm thinking of it almost minute by minute, hour by hour, it goes away. The clamors of the world come in. I'm not essential. I am essentially spiritual, but the devil is in me, guaranteed. There's plenty of evil. Good Jack, bad Jack. My friends call me Jack. So it takes work and cooperation, right? In no case does God render us white as snow and keep us that way without what? Cooperation. So, but yes, absolutely, and I thank you for that.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. And with the good news is John's coming back tomorrow. Maybe call you Jack is coming back next week. And he's going to be sharing on William D. Silkworth, the little doctor who loved drunks, just next week at the time. Be careful your time factor next week. It's going to be changed. It's going to be 6 p.m. in the East Coast, New York next week. So just mind that time. 6 p.m. next week. And we have Bill Sherberg with us on Sunday. We're in chapter 4 already of his marvelous book, 31 chapter. We're in the big book, The Creation of AA, and we're reading about the Rockefeller dinner, which took place in December 1937. And the following week, then we have Jim Worley is going to be doing a presentation on Knickerbocker Hospital. I believe this was a hospital. Dr. Silkworth worked in it in the 40s, 45, he said to us this evening. And we're finishing off the month with Tradition 9 with Lynn S., who wrote that marvelous book on What Slender Threads, the traditions from a historical perspective. John, I'm assuming you're going to close with something, but I think I'm responsible or something. Is that what you're going with, John? Or how are you going to close this meeting?
I'm fine closing with whatever. My preference is the Lord's Prayer, but I take...
Well, you'll go with the Lord's Prayer if you wish. We'll do the Lord's Prayer if you wish. Yeah, if you wish.
Okay.
Yeah. If you'd like to unmute and join in, please do. John, we'll leave it back to you. Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, thank you so much. Our Father, who art in heaven,
hallowed be thy name.
Thy
kingdom come,
on
thy will be done
on earth
as it is in heaven.
Give us this
Bless us
day
our daily bread. With our trespasses, as we forgive those
we forgive those
for thine is the kingdom, power,
and the glory forever.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all.
Come back and work it.
Hey, John, thanks a lot. That was wonderful.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Gloria, you got off that horse.
Thank you, John.
David, I got to hit the road because I got somebody waiting. Thank you.
Judy.
John.
See you next week.
Good question, Judy.